Hello, and welcome to Control Alt Deliver. I'm your host, Yasin, and today we're diving into one of the toughest challenges in tech leadership, which is scaling software systems. We're not going to be looking at the hockey stick version of it, but the messy realities of scaling. To help us unpack this, I'm joined by Gemma Whitehouse. Gemma is an experienced CTO and has spent almost 2 decades building and scaling technology strategies from the ground up. She has worked through firefighting the fallout of rushed MVPs to guiding scale-ups as they wrestle to meet growing customer demands. And today she's here to share some of her views on the topic. Gemma, welcome to the show.
Thanks for inviting me. It's great to be talking to you today.
I'm sure a lot of our listeners are going to be flocking to your LinkedIn profile, right after they see this episode. But, I would, before they do that, it would be great if you can, maybe spend 20 seconds telling us about your 20 glorious years in tech. And before I forget, what I also would love to see is, I couldn't help but notice on your LinkedIn profile that you have a music degree. So from music to CTO, would love to hear that part as well.
Yeah, 20 years. Oh my God. It's suddenly, this is your life, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I'm day to day and what I do now. So at day to day, I am a consultant CTO. I work on a fractional and interim basis for PE and VC backed startups and scale ups. I started probably consulting around 5 years ago on the sort of pre-seed and seed sort of stage, kind of early stage businesses. And as I've gone on, those businesses have just really gotten bigger. And I've just kind of built up my knowledge and experience in that space over that period. I suppose in terms of how I started and sort of going back in time. So I studied music. You're quite right. And I think I started very young actually. I got a scholarship when I was like 14, and I think by the time I was in my 20s, I felt like I'd had a career. My father was actually an engineer, and so I kind of had exposure, if that makes sense, to those things. And my first kind of job actually was there was an opportunity to kind of learn on the job and do some well at that point because web programming was totally separate, right? At that point, back in 2005. So this is before iPhones. Oh my God. And I learned kind of basic markup and CSS and basic SQL at that point and or database queries. And then I guess over time I just sort of moved into kind of other roles as I went along and delivery-based roles, but then have also kind of gone back and upskilled in terms of my engineering capabilities and sort of system design, infrastructure knowledge, and built my own SaaS applications as well. So I feel like I've kind of done like all aspects,
Yeah.
maybe at this point. Yeah.
That's very impressive. And something my kids are growing up as well, and they keep telling me that they don't need to go to university because they can do anything that they want. And now with AI and all the tools that they have, they all feel invincible. But I think it's a great story that even without AI in our generation, yours and mine, you managed to go from music to CTO. That's a hell of an achievement. So very good, very good. So that takes us to our topic, Gemma. What we're going to first dive into is scaling software systems, right? So, it all sounds very exciting. We're talking about more customers, more users. There is a growth story behind it, more money, investors are happy, PE companies are happy. And everybody says it's a good problem to have, right? But easier said than done, especially from the technology side. And it often feels like, the first signs of scaling pains, appear a bit late to all the leaders at the company. In your opinion, or based on your experience, what do you think are the earliest red flags that you see a company's scaling issues are about to surface?
So, I mean, typical ones are kind of just basic operating kind of experience, knowledge, or lack thereof, and trying to sort of scale your sales at the same time as build out your product and define what your product is beyond its initial kind of, I don't know, product market fit. that's a very common challenge to face. But I think there's also things like, sort of technical debt, and cyclomatic complexity, and that's actually more common than anybody really wants to admit, I think, across the trade. And there's a number of factors for that. I mean, if you think about being an early stage startup, and especially now, if you're using tooling like, I don't know, the Copilots or cursors or any of these sort of coding automation solutions, right? I mean, just the speed of kind of development and how you're having to sort of respond to the market, your customers, the product proposition, the changes there are all going to create a level of possible future technical debt, right? Fairly quickly, potentially. And I think often it's the case that they will build out a kind of initial kind of MVP type proposition, and it will be sort of believed that within the limited framework or limited sort of customer base and demands, that is perfectly serviceable. And it's simply that people lack at that early stage enough knowledge of enterprise solution architecture and what enterprise SaaS building or enterprise software service building actually, demands. And then the kind of the issues start to pile up in terms of kind of technical debt and sort of challenges and inappropriate solution choices. And so I would say that the kind of most early kind of red flags, I think, for me are that the expectations don't match up with the capabilities or deliverables, right? And there will be some obvious kind of warning signs for that. And you might see that on the technical side, but you might also see that within the operating approach as well. So yeah, those are very common.
Yeah, those are common, and a lot of times those are unavoidable as well, right?
Yes.
Because when you're starting out, you're not sure how successful you're going to be. So you're focused on doing something quick and dirty. And like you said, with all the AI tools out there, it's becoming easier and easier to do that. And then all of a sudden you realize your product is getting traction in the market, and you don't have enough time to do the perfect thing technically to scale. And a lot of times people rely on their scrappy MVP code that they have, and then keep building upon it. But how do you even make a decision that this is time to actually scrap your scrappy MVP and then start from scratch?
I think this is really a tricky one, actually, because it's fairly rare by the time that I actually end up consulting on a project that a rewrite from scratch is an appropriate approach. Now, that's not to say that I haven't seen a couple of cases where that's possible, but generally, what I find is that if they're starting to hit these scaling pains, if they've hit a sort of threshold where the existing solution isn't going to serve the customer demands because it's simply not been designed to support that, then they're already at a point where a rewrite from scratch would be pretty challenging.
Mhm.
One of the challenges is often, especially with startups and sort of scale up space, you're in a market or a domain that is evolving, right? It's not like I can look at benchmarks out in the industry and go, well, there are 10 of these businesses who are benchmarked against whatever the metrics are, right? To give me a good guide about what I might be sort of setting my expectations against. That doesn't exist. So then you're in kind of this innovative space where it's very hard to make an accurate forecast. Actually, how does your engineering team, who's probably going to be challenged with estimating and forecasting anyway, because they're learning often on the job and they're learning as a team as well. This is like one of the most common kind of software engineering pain points, to make a sort of accurate prediction there. So then also as coming in as an executive, you can sort of roughly t-shirt size something like that.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to really convey the level of kind of complexity you might be diving into, and you shouldn't be naive about that. So I think there's a specific set of business conditions, and I can think of a case scenario where there was one pre-seed business who actually had a dispute with the engineering team, who then walked away from the project. But the scale of the application and solution was such that it could be rebuilt within sort of 6 months. Well,
Mhm.
that seems like a reasonable cost, and it's a position from which it was actually difficult to kind of negate in any other way, right? So there are I think sometimes there are sort of special conditions where it makes sense to do that, right? And that just totally depends on your context. But generally, where you end up is a kind of incremental approach, because you don't want to wear too much business risk when your team are having to essentially learn uh, how to scale something, and you're evolving into a kind of innovative space anyway. So those are some of the pitfalls, I would say.
Yeah, and a lot of times, I think it'd be very rare that you actually need to just scrap out everything and rewrite from scratch. And in the rare cases where you actually do need a rewrite, maybe a parallel team, a team maintaining existing code, and then another team working on the bright new code for that product. What are your thoughts on that, Gemma? Like, do you think these two streams can actually work together, even people-wise? Because now you'll have a distinction within the company that, this is a set of team that is working on the old piece of code, which is eventually going to get scrapped. And then there is a new team who's working on the new, sexy, shiny product for the future.
I think where the friction points can come is that the internal team worry that their skills are less valuable to the
Yeah.
business. Yeah, and they worry that their relationship is damaged. They worry about the security of their jobs. And I think, in terms of managing their kind of well-being and incentives and motivations, well, you should be quite careful about, okay, how that transition happens, making sure that the incentives for them are aligned, as well as the broader business. But you may also have challenges there, like, well, are you having to convert to a completely different technology stack? And is there really a very good justification for that?
Mhm.
Right? And is that something that your staff can realistically learn, or is it not? Right? There can be some pretty tough choices there in some scenarios. I mean, my position is always, is it serviceable?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, will it serve your business needs? Right? I mean, there are certain kind of programming languages that I personally prefer, but that wouldn't preclude me making a kind of recommendation based on the context of what will work for the business,
Mhm.
right? Regardless of how much I might dislike PHP
Yeah.
or some other, language or solution, or whatever it is. You work with what you've got in order to achieve the business outcome in the most practical way, right?
Yeah.
And take people on that journey with you. And I think sometimes actually bringing in externals if you're a bit smart about how you set that up, it can be a real benefit, because they can really sort of add value, leverage their capability, help accelerate things forward. And then also, if if that's a temporary kind of engagement for whatever reason,
Mhm.
then also hand that back off to the existing team. I mean, I have seen augmentation scenarios that have gone quite well in that sense. So yeah, I think it can work well if
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you as well. And scaling is just not a technical problem. It's actually about people as well. When you need to scale systems and your business is growing, you have a lot more new features, functionalities, refactoring the code, making it faster, quicker, scalable, all of that. You need people to do that, right? But you have to try and find a balance between hiring too quickly, because then you might lose the agility, the culture, the entire concept, how the company was brought into to life, and then being overly cautious and relying on your fantastic four, the first four people who are working on the code. and then them trying to retain everything and becoming indispensable. We've all gone through those issues that after a year or two, even when the team is growing, there are these few people on the team that have become indispensable. They all come in the middle of the overall goal for the company to scale. So, what are your thoughts on that, Gemma, and how to manage, between hiring people, these indispensable people who become literally indispensable over time? How do we manage that as a CTO?
Yeah, this is a good one actually because it's such a common problem. And I think the indispensable at some point need to become less indispensable. Right. But you still have to balance that against ensuring that they feel valued and incentivized. But if you've got certain individuals who have become silos for specific solutioning knowledge or product knowledge, that is a business risk, actually.
Yeah.
Because as soon as they depart, you're really exposed as a business. So I think it's about making sure that you've got a certain sort of strategic hires, which are kind of sort of softening those risks where that's actually possible to achieve that. And I think it's also about making sure that as you bring on new members of staff, that you're very conscious about that engineering onboarding and what those kind of functions are, the amount of knowledge transfer, that you have got good documentation.
Yeah. Have you faced this before, Gemma, where the business side is disconnected from the engineering side? Business side is like, I want these features. This is what's going to get me to the next level, my next release, and this is going to drive X amount of revenue. This is what the investors are pushing for. This is what PE companies are pushing for. They want everything yesterday, and then they want everything perfect. And then they don't want to spend that much time and effort on it either. How do we bridge that gap?
I think I think that can be challenging depending on the kind of business and the expectations of the business. There's a sort of there's this concept, isn't there, of software being completely reliable, like your calculator, an old-fashioned calculator might be, right? It always returns the same result. You can always depend on it, and that's just not the reality of building software, and especially not brand new software. They'll use solutions and services by the Microsofts, the Googles of this world, and that's what you end up being benchmarked against as a sort of early stage or scaling business. Of course, well, that's quite unfair,
Yeah.
isn't it, really? Because you're often playing into an innovative space. You've got teams who are often learning on the job, building something that they've maybe never built before. And the nature of all software is that it will have a level of kind of bugs and errors and problems, and you're doing your very best to try and kind of manage that and reduce that overhead wherever possible. But I think it's also about getting your executives and your leadership capabilities and your customers engaged and really sort of leading their expectations and getting them involved in the process. I think that really helps to soften that. If they're the ones actually doing some of the testing and they're the ones also feeding back as part of that process, and that's a kind of iterative process, so not releasing everything in one big fanfare, big bang, but actually having a sort of incremental kind of soft launch at each kind of release. Well, that engagement helps that familiarity and also helps soften and build that confidence as well with your user base and those exec teams. So I think there's a certain amount of, depending on your context, it's about building that confidence.
Yeah, yeah. I think, Gemma, I think it'll be a very good time to discuss, or, I really want to get your views on. A lot of times, people think about relying on getting help from outside. There is this concept of fractional CTOs, on the rise. It's getting very popular. I know you're something that you're very interested in and work quite a bit on as well. How can that actually help organizations tackle issues like, is this the right time to manage technical debt? When is a view from outside, a technical hardcore view from outside, helping in this entire situation?
Often it's that certain strategic goals will be a concern, and that could be kind of preparing for an acquisition, or it could even be post-acquisition and building towards new goals that the acquirer has. I've seen both those scenarios. It might also be that there are particular concerns within the exec team or the investors. So that they will have particular concerns around not meeting customer targets, and that there are errors and complaints from the customers in terms of the solution performance. Well, that would tend to suggest that there is a technical debt issue that needs to be resolved. There might also be other organizational indicators which may be causing frustrations, and it's very hard to see the wood for the trees at the sort of macro level.
Yeah.
In which case you would need someone to come in and make an assessment and make some recommendations, and then potentially out of the back of those recommendations help to implement those improvements or those changes. And that might be in a more hands-on role and actually help manage those through, or it might just be an advisory capacity and help support existing teams.
Okay. No, good, good. So, we'll change gears over here a little bit, Gemma, and how can we, uh, talk about scaling and not talk about AI? It has become an intrinsic part of all of our discussions, be it on the business side or the technical side. There is a lot of power with the AI tools that are available now. What are your thoughts on how these tools can actually help with resolving scaling problems at different companies? How much truth there is to it? How much of it is fad, or is it really creating more issues than solving problems? What's your take on it?
I think this is a really interesting and a kind of hot area at the moment. And I think there's the sort of operating considerations, how to make your engineering capability team or business operations more efficient. And deploying some of those solutions can certainly help elevate some of those capabilities. But there's also the sort of perception, I guess, that just by adding a sort of Gen AI sort of solution to our product proposition, that we will then 10x our, sales or customer engagement results somehow. And I think the reality is a bit kind of harder to define in terms of the kind of benefits some of those solutions add. And fundamentally, if I'm thinking about things from a purely a kind of operating kind of perspective, like how do I help enable my engineering team to be kind of more efficient, or reduce some of those overheads, be more creative maybe with some of these tools. Well, then offering or setting up solutions like Copilot and Cursor and sort of coding tooling will help enable some of those functions, right? But then inevitably, if you haven't actually benchmarked and baselined what makes you operationally efficient as a team anyway, what are you measuring against? How you can't really say that we think we're, I don't know, 20% faster. Well, how do you know that? Compared to what? Right. So and that is a very common kind of conversation actually across the engineering and tech trade. Often teams will cite that they feel a benefit. Well, that's brilliant. But there's also a cost to using these solutions, right? And if you think also about the context of which they're used, I mean, there's no doubt that they increase cyclomatic complexity. There's no doubt that you have a higher kind of error rate and more security concerns if you're using a lot of these tools. I mean, again, it depends totally on your context, right, and how they're being applied and deployed. So you're sort of, in some scenarios, you can be a kind of I don't know, buying from Peter to paper, or whatever the expression is. You're sort of transferring those problems rather than solving them in some cases.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt, but this is where we see a big disconnect between the management team, the business side, and the technical team as well. Because all these business leaders, company leaders, CEOs, and stuff, they're going to all these conferences. They're reading these larger than life articles from all the big guns in the market. and they're announcing, oh, we're going, we're Meta announcing 40% of our code is now written by AI, Google announcing similar things, Microsoft announcing similar things, but they have their own agendas as well. They're all pushing their solutions in the end. But the thing is, it is creating that perception, and a very, very strong perception amongst business leaders that, now probably coding is going to be a commodity, or it already is. And now if a CTO goes back and tells the management team that, oh, we need to spend or invest so much because now we need to scale to a certain level because market demand is there, we're getting a lot of hits. They almost by default assume that it is a very easy problem to solve because now there are AI tools. You should be able to do it a lot quicker. There's this gap in understanding of what's possible, what's perception, and what's actually possible in reality, because they're two very different things.
Yeah, I think this comes down to your kind of context, doesn't it? Because within operating context, you can say, okay, well, this is, these are the benchmarks that are out there. This is what this is what we're currently doing to be efficient. This is where this tooling may or may not apply and may or may not add benefit, right? And there's a specific measurable way to sort of define that and do that. So those sorts of contexts can help frame those sorts of discussions, I guess. But I think there's actually something really, really fundamental. And this sort of goes back to the kind of market dynamic and the kind of perception that's out on the market actually about these sorts of solutions.
Mm-hmm.
And they've largely been taken up as a sort of consumer-driven kind of market trend, really.
Yeah.
And the biggest change and the most impactful change is actually how consumers are using these solutions for search and product recommendations, and having knocked out significant amounts of web traffic now for kind of third-party websites and products, and identifying information. So that on a kind of in the bigger picture of things, that is a much bigger deal in many ways. And there are businesses who are starting to respond to that and re-architecting and building out totally new propositions for this new world. So I think sometimes business leaders and executives, they're sort of they're taking something from one context and they're not applying it appropriately. And I think it's for us as engineering leaders to try and help support and guide some of those conversations so they're targeted in the right way and we're getting really kind of meaningful opportunities for the businesses that we support.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you're right, it has taken by storm. And because it is taken by storm in the general public, the perception is that, the magic that it is doing in, for common users, that same magic can be replicated on everything that you do. We have experimented with these AI development tools quite a bit. And we continue to do so. And we've started utilizing them as well to our advantage. What we actually gain in terms of productivity, it is far from the perception that the market has. We have more than played with so many different tools. We're utilizing them, and at best, the overall increase in productivity is less than 10%. But even that's big gain from where we were even a year ago. And I think it's going to keep increasing with time. Things that were not possible even 6 weeks ago, they're possible today. So we're in that stage of time where things are moving at a very, very fast pace. From what it seems like, it's only going to keep getting better and better. And let's see where we're speaking maybe 6 months from now, where we are at with AI and stuff. But something that we all face, we all have to deal with, and see how we can use it to our advantage.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's shifting so fast, and I think the numbers I've found quite shocking when I've actually kind of bother to really consider the contexts and how those sort of trends are starting to play out. It's really interesting.
Yeah. Well, I've had a very good conversation with you, Gemma, And the last thing I'm going to ask you is, to wrap things up, if you were to distill all your experience that you've had over the last 2 decades, into a couple of golden rules for scaling, that I could, write it and put it in my office over here, what would those be?
Well, for an early stage scale up, I would say that the two key things that they always need are someone to help manage deliverables and help someone to help scale, design the target architecture. I think those are the two things that if you're at least armed with those, if you've at least got experienced, capable people there, that actually quite a lot of the other stuff you can sort of learn to solve. But that those are kind of like some of the most consistent kind of pain points, I guess. Because if you've at least got as far as you've got customers, you've got sales, you've got that sort of product market fit. Well, then the next thing is how do you deliver against that? And then what does your solution need to look like? And then everything else sort of falls out of that, really.
Yeah.
So I don't think there are any kind of hard and fast rules. I just feel like there's a kind of practical set of scenarios and kind of responses to those scenarios, which helps different businesses at different stages kind of get from A to B.
Yeah,
So
yeah. And I
I,
totally agree with you, Gemma. The question was unfair. And I totally agree with you that, it is all dependent on what the product is, where are they at with the market, what the market demands are, what the company structure is, what's the funding at hand, how fast. There's so many things at play that there's no right answer that you can just say, oh, these are the three things that you need to look out for and you'll be fine. There are a lot of things at play, and everything needs to be considered, and then a decision need to be made. But that brings us towards the end of our conversation, Gemma. I had a very good time discussing this with you. I'm sure all the listeners will learn from it as well. And I'll make sure I'll tell my son. My son actually wants to go to music school as well.
oh,
But
good.
then the dad, which is me, keeps telling him, what, you need to pay your bills as well. But now I'm going to go back and tell him about you and your experience. You started off with music, and then now you're a very successful CTO, and all of this can work. Your passion, and then what you want to essentially maybe pay your bills for. They all can go hand in hand.
Yeah, music tech is a big growth area. I'm absolutely sure. So it's maybe a good combination to be interested in. So,
Yes, yes. But
yeah.
thank you very much for your time, Gemma. It was a pleasure, and then we'll stay in touch.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks for inviting me.